Welcome to Little English Studio, where English learning meets the inspiring stories of the world's greatest people. Here, we tell powerful life journeys in clear and simple English, so you can improve your English while discovering lessons of success, struggle, and hope. Today, we bring you the remarkable story of Dr. David Warren, the Australian scientist whose invention, the black box flight recorder, has saved millions of lives and transformed aviation forever. This is not just the story of a machine. It is the story of a man who turned personal tragedy into global safety, the story of persistence against doubt, the story of how one person's vision made the skies safer for all of us. David Ronald de May Warren was born on March 20, 1925, in a remote region of northern Australia known as Groote Eylandt. At that time, Groote Eylandt was isolated, with a small population and a simple way of life. David's father, Reverend Hubert Warren, was a missionary. His mother, Ellie, cared for the family. David grew up in a household filled with faith, learning, and curiosity. But when David was only 9 years old, tragedy struck. His father boarded one of the first commercial flights in Australia, a plane powered by early technology, experimental and not always safe. The plane crashed. Everyone on board died. David's life was changed forever. He had lost his father. And though he was too young to understand at the time, this tragic event planted the seed of a lifelong obsession: how to make flying safer. As a child, David loved gadgets. He built small radios, played with chemistry sets, and was fascinated by engines. His friends remembered him as curious, restless, and always tinkering. But more than anything, the absence of his father left a hole that would never close. His loss would later inspire him to dedicate his life to preventing other families from facing the same pain. In his teenage years, David was sent to boarding school in Sydney. There he discovered his love for science and chemistry. He was not just interested in books, he wanted to apply science to solve problems. After finishing school, David went to the University of Sydney, where he studied chemistry and fuel technology. He became fascinated by aeronautics, the science of flight, and especially by the fuels that powered airplanes. At this time, the world was changing rapidly. It was the 1940s, during and after World War II. Aircraft technology was advancing quickly, but safety was not always guaranteed. Planes were faster, larger, and more powerful, but crashes still happened, and investigators often had little information to explain why. David wanted to change that. In the early 1950s, David joined the Aeronautical Research Laboratories, ARL, in Melbourne, Australia. He worked as a scientist specializing in fuels and explosions. His job was to study how and why aircraft engines failed, and how fuels could be made safer. One of his early assignments was to investigate the crashes of the new Comet jet airliner, the world's first commercial jet. The Comet was revolutionary, but it also suffered from a series of mysterious crashes. Investigators struggled because after a crash, there was often very little evidence left. The wreckage was destroyed, the pilots and crew were gone, and no one knew exactly what had happened in the final moments. David asked himself a simple but profound question: what if we could record everything that happens inside a plane, especially the voices of the pilots and the data from the instruments? This question would lead to one of the most important inventions in aviation history. David imagined a device that could survive a crash and tell the story of what happened. He thought, if a machine could record the voices in the cockpit and the technical data, like speed, altitude, and direction, investigators would finally know the truth after an accident. He began to design what he called the flight memory unit. In 1956, David built the first prototype. It was a small machine that used magnetic wire recording, a technology similar to early tape recorders. It could record hours of audio and flight data. The box was designed to be crash-proof and fire-resistant. At first, people laughed at his idea. Some said it was impossible. Others said it was unnecessary. Some even called it a spy box and said pilots would never accept it. But David believed in it. He knew that without a recording, aviation safety would never improve. He demonstrated the device to officials and engineers. Slowly, some began to see the value. But acceptance did not come easily. For years, David fought against skepticism. Many in the aviation industry thought his invention was too radical. Airlines didn't want to spend money. Pilots worried their conversations would be recorded. Even his own research organization, ARL, was hesitant. They told him to focus on fuel research, not gadgets, but David refused to give up. He continued to refine the design, making it smaller, tougher, and more reliable. He believed that one day the world would understand its importance. Finally, in the early 1960s, the tide began to turn. After a series of high-profile crashes in Australia and around the world, investigators realized that they desperately needed more information. In 1960, Australia became the first country in the world to make the black box mandatory on all commercial aircraft. Soon, the rest of the world followed. David Warren's invention was no longer a dream. It was a reality, one that would save countless lives. Once adopted, the black box transformed aviation safety. Every time a crash happened, investigators now had a powerful tool. They could listen to the pilot's final conversations. They could see the exact speed, altitude, and technical data. Instead of guessing, they could know the truth. Instead of repeating mistakes, airlines could fix them. Thanks to David's invention, planes became safer and safer. Crashes became rarer. Flying became one of the safest forms of travel in the world. Today, every commercial aircraft on Earth carries not one but two black boxes, a cockpit voice recorder (CVR) and a flight data recorder (FDR). These devices are not really black, they are painted bright orange, so they can be found easily after a crash. But the world still calls them black boxes, a name that stuck from the early days. For many years, David's role in the invention was not fully recognized. He remained a modest scientist, working quietly while his device became mandatory worldwide. But later in life, honors finally came. In 2002, he was awarded the Order of Australia for his contributions to aviation safety. In 2008, a new research centre in Melbourne was named the David Warren Laboratory in his honour. David lived long enough to see his invention celebrated. When asked about his legacy, he said, "If my invention saves even one life, it will have been worthwhile." In truth, it has saved millions. David Warren passed away on July 19, 2010 at the age of 85. By then, he had become a national hero in Australia and a global figure in aviation history. David Warren's life teaches us many lessons. Turn tragedy into purpose. The loss of his father inspired him to create something that prevents future losses. Believe in your vision. Even when others doubted, he continued. Small ideas can have big impacts. A simple recording device changed an entire industry. True heroes work quietly. He was not rich, not famous, but his invention protects all of us every time we fly. The story of David Warren reminds us that innovation is not just about technology, it is about humanity. Behind every invention is a story of struggle, hope, and determination. Next time you step onto a plane, remember, you are safer because one man turned his pain into progress. David Warren gave the world more than a machine. He gave us trust in the skies, and that is why he will always be remembered as the man who invented the black box.